They never tell you outright. No declarations, no grand betrayals, just a slow, quiet shift in the air. It is in the way they speak to you, short, clipped, polite but distant, the way their eyes don't quite meet yours the way they used to, the way conversations seem to flow around you as if you are no longer part of the current. It happens so gradually that you don't even realize it at first. And then one day you wake up and feel it, the coldness, the distance, the invisible wall that has been built between you and them. You think back, trying to pinpoint the moment it all began. Was it something you said? Something you did? You retrace your steps, searching for the crack in the foundation, the precise moment when the love that once felt so certain began to wither. But there is no single moment, no obvious fracture, just a slow erosion, a pulling away, a series of small omissions that eventually add up to exile. They are still there, of course, they still sit across from you at the table, still speak your name when necessary, but it is different now. Their warmth is reserved for others. Their laughter no longer includes you. You have become something of a ghost, present but unseen, acknowledged but not embraced. And the worst part? You cannot confront them because there is nothing solid to hold on to, nothing tangible you can point to and say, this is where it changed. You test the waters, you reach out, attempting to reclaim the closeness that once existed. You make conversation, hoping to spark the old familiarity, but their responses are shallow, rehearsed, designed to keep you at arm's length. A nod here, a half-hearted smile there. They have already decided to move on from you, and they are doing so with the quiet efficiency of those who do not wish to cause a scene. That is the cruelty of silent rejection. It does not give you the courtesy of an explanation. There is no fight, no heated argument that leaves you with a clear understanding of where you stand, just silence. And silence is far more brutal than words, because words at the very least offer clarity. Silence leaves you in the dark, searching for answers that will never come. You begin to realize that it is not about anything you have done, but about who you have become. You are different now, and they sense it. You have outgrown the space they assigned to you, and they do not know what to do with that. Your thoughts, your ambitions, your very essence, it all unsettles them. So they pull away, not in anger, not in hatred, but in quiet dismissal. It is not a punishment, it is an unspoken decision. You are no longer one of them, not in the way you once were, and they will never tell you why, because they do not have to. The silence says it all. You spend so much time wondering what you did wrong, turning every memory over in your mind, dissecting every conversation, searching for the mistake that made them look at you differently. But the truth is far more unsettling. It was never about what you did. It was about who you are. And that is a crime you cannot undo. You were born into a family, into a system, into a set of rules written long before you took your first breath. They had an image of you before you even had a name. Expectations wrapped around you like invisible chains, defining who you were supposed to be, how you were supposed to think, what you were meant to become. And for a time, you played the part. Maybe you even believed in it. But something inside you always felt off, like a door in your mind that never quite shut. A whisper that told you there was something more, something beyond the narrow path they had paved for you. Then one day you changed, or maybe you finally became who you were meant to be. And that is when they turned away. Not because you hurt them, not because you betrayed them, but because you became a mirror they did not want to look into. You started asking questions they never dared to ask. You stepped outside the lines they had drawn, and that terrified them. You see, people don't reject you because you are wrong. They reject you because you make them uncomfortable. Your very existence is a reminder that they too had a choice, that they could have stepped outside, that they could have been something more, but they never did. And now, standing in front of them, you have become proof that the prison they accepted was never locked to begin with. So they push you away, not with anger, but with quiet avoidance. Not with confrontation, but with exclusion. Because it is easier to erase you than to face what you represent. They would rather pretend you lost your way than admit they never found theirs. They will call you the problem, the difficult one, the black sheep, anything to convince themselves that you are the one who changed, not them. That you are lost, not them. But here's the truth. They do not reject you. They reject what you remind them of. The dreams they buried, the voice they silenced, the choices they never had the courage to make. And for that, they cannot embrace you, because to do so would be to admit that they too once wanted more. So stop searching for the moment you lost them. Stop blaming yourself for the distance they created. You did nothing wrong. You simply became something they could not understand. And for that they turned their backs. Not because you are unworthy, but because you are free. And freedom is the one thing they never forgave themselves for not choosing. There is a certain order to things, a rhythm, a script that has been rehearsed for generations. You are born into it, molded by it, shaped to fit within the lines drawn long before your time. You are expected to follow, to obey, to accept. Not because it makes sense, not because it fulfills you, but because it is tradition. Because it is what has always been done. And then there is you. You who dared to question. You who looked at the structure they built and saw the cracks in its foundation. You who refused to bow just because they told you to. That refusal, that quiet defiance, it is not just a rebellion. It is an offense. Not because you are wrong, but because your very existence disturbs the fragile illusion they have spent their entire lives protecting. They do not fear your choices. They fear what your choices say about theirs. Your unwillingness to conform reminds them that they too once had a choice, that they could have broken free but chose not to, and that realization is unbearable. So they cling to what they know. They dig their heels deeper into the past, into the traditions that define them, because to acknowledge you is to acknowledge the possibility that everything they built their lives upon may not be as certain as they once believed. Comfort is a powerful thing. It numbs, it soothes. It makes people believe that as long as they do what is expected, they are safe. Safe from judgment, from failure, from regret. But you are the storm they did not prepare for. You disrupt the order. You are the question mark in a world that only accepts periods, and for that they cannot forgive you. So they call you difficult, disrespectful, ungrateful. They do not use these words because they are true, but because they need them to be true. They need a reason to dismiss you, to cast you aside, to label you as the problem. Because if they admit that you are not the problem, then they must face the unsettling possibility that they are the ones who never dared to step outside the lines. It is not hatred that fuels their rejection, it is fear. Fear that their way is not the only way. Fear that the traditions they hold so tightly may no longer serve them. Fear that they too could have chosen differently, and instead of facing that fear they choose to turn away from you, to exile you, to pretend that you are lost, rather than admit they have spent their lives standing still. But you are not lost. You are not broken. You are simply awake in a world that prefers to remain asleep. And for that they will reject you. Not because you have done anything wrong, but because your refusal to conform is a truth they are not ready to face. Rejection is a peculiar thing. It rarely announces itself with fury. It does not always come with words sharp enough to wound. No, the most painful rejection is the quiet kind, the kind that comes wrapped in polite distance, in forced smiles, in the slow, deliberate erosion of closeness. You feel it before you understand it. You sense the shift in the way they speak to you, the hesitation before they acknowledge your presence, the way their warmth has cooled to something distant, indifferent, and you wonder why. Hatred at least would make sense. Hatred would give you something to hold on to, something to fight against. But this is something else entirely. They do not rage against you. They do not curse your name. They simply turn away. And that is far worse, isn't it? To be discarded not as an enemy, but as an inconvenience. But understand this. It is not because you have wronged them. It is not because you have failed them. It is because in ways they will never admit, you remind them of what they never became. You are the path they did not take, the dream they abandoned, the proof that they too once had the chance to step beyond the life that was laid out before them, but chose not to. And that is something they cannot bear. They see you, and in you they see every risk they were too afraid to take, every ambition they silenced, every dream they let wither in the name of duty or comfort or fear. And rather than face that truth, rather than acknowledge the weight of their own choices, they turn away from you instead. Because it is easier. Because if they can convince themselves that you were misguided, that you are the one who has lost their way, then they never have to confront the possibility that they were the ones who never truly lived. They do not reject you because they despise you. They reject you because your very existence is a question they do not wish to answer. You are the reflection they avoid, the possibility they buried long ago. And so, rather than embrace you, they distance themselves, not with cruelty, but with absence, not with anger, but with silence. But listen to me. This is not your burden to carry. Their regret is not yours to mend. Their choices are not yours to undo. You were not made to live a life that makes them comfortable. You were not born to shrink yourself just so they do not have to confront their own limitations. Let them turn away. Let them sit in the safety of the familiar, while you walk a path they never dared to tread. And one day, when you look back, you will not do so with bitterness. You will not seek their approval or their understanding. You will simply know that you became what they never had the courage to be, and that is why they let you go. Loneliness has a way of wrapping itself around you like a cold wind. It does not arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly, filling the spaces where laughter used to be, settling in the silence where voices once called your name. At first you resist it. You search for the warmth that has faded, reaching for hands that no longer reach back. But rejection is not something you can bargain with. It does not, it simply is. And so you are left with solitude. Not chosen, but forced upon you. A vast, aching emptiness where family once stood, where belonging once lived. It is in this silence that the questions begin. Who am I without them? without their approval, their validation, their acceptance. If I am no longer part of them, then who am I at all? This is where most people break. This is where they surrender, shrinking themselves to fit back into the mold, apologizing for things they should never be sorry for, begging for a place at a table that no longer welcomes them. Because to be alone is terrifying. To stand outside the circle, to feel the weight of that exile pressing against your chest, it is almost unbearable. Almost. But here is the truth they never told you. Loneliness is not a punishment. It is a passage. A painful, merciless passage, but a necessary one. Because in that emptiness, something remarkable happens. When the voices of others fade, when their expectations, their demands, their judgments no longer shape you, you begin to hear something else. Something you have not heard in a very long time. Yourself. You start to understand that you were never truly alone. You were simply lost in a crowd that never saw you. You realize that the acceptance you longed for was never real, that it was conditional, fleeting, dependent on your ability to fit into a role that was never meant for you. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Loneliness forces you to confront the one person you have spent your entire life avoiding. Yourself. It strips away the distractions, the noise, the illusions, and leaves you with nothing but truth. And yes, that truth is raw, it is uncomfortable. It is filled with wounds that have never healed, but it is yours. You learn that solitude is not the enemy, that rejection is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of something greater, a freedom so profound that most people never dare to claim it, because most people would rather belong anywhere than stand alone in their truth. But you are not most people. Let them reject you. Let them turn away. What you will find on the other side of that loneliness is something they will never know. Yourself. And once you have that, once you truly know who you are, you will never again beg to be accepted. Because you will have finally accepted yourself. You have spent too long waiting for their approval, for their recognition, for some sign that you are enough in their eyes. You have shaped yourself around their expectations, measured your worth by their acceptance, held your breath, hoping they would one day see you, truly see you and say, yes, you belong. But they never do they? Not in the way you want them to, not in the way you deserve. Instead, they move the goalposts, raise the bar, keep you chasing something that will never come. And the cruelest part? You begin to believe that the fault is yours. That if you were just a little different, a little quieter, a little more like them, then maybe, just maybe, they would finally embrace you. But here's a truth they never told you. You do not need their approval to define your worth. You never did. You have simply been tricked into thinking you do. Convinced that your value lies in their hands when, all along, it has been within you. Consider this. Who were you before they told you who you should be? Before they shaped your thoughts? Before they dictated your path? Strip away their opinions, their judgments, their expectations, and what remains? You, unapologetic, unfiltered, untouched by their demands. That is the person they cannot accept, not because you are unworthy, but because you are beyond their control. They have built a world in which your worth is conditional, based on obedience, on conformity, on your willingness to play by rules you never agreed to. But if you step outside of that, if you refuse to be measured by their standards, they panic. Not because you are lost, but because you are free. And free people terrify those who remain in cages of their own making. So they withhold their approval, hoping you will return, hoping you will need them enough to surrender who you are just to feel their acceptance again. And perhaps once you would have, but not anymore, because now you see it for what it is, a game you were never meant to win. So stop waiting, stop seeking, stop twisting yourself into something smaller just to fit into their narrow vision of you. There is a world beyond their approval, beyond their judgments, beyond the suffocating need to be chosen. And once you step into it, you will wonder why you ever begged for their acceptance in the first place. You do not need them to tell you who you are. You do not need their permission to exist as you were meant to. They may never understand you. They may never embrace you, and that is fine, because you have something greater than their approval. You have yourself, and that is enough. That has always been enough. There will come a moment, perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but it will come, when you stop grieving their rejection, when the weight of their absence no longer presses against your chest, when the questions that once haunted you, why did they turn away, why couldn't they accept me, fade into silence, and in that silence, a new understanding will rise. It was never about your failures. It was never about your mistakes. It was never about anything you did wrong. It was about your strength. The strength they saw in you before you even knew it existed. The strength that made them uncomfortable, that made them distance themselves, that made them push you away, not out of hatred, but out of fear. You see, people do not reject what they do not notice. They do not fight against what does not threaten them. If you had been ordinary, if you had been willing to fold yourself into their expectations, if you had lived in the same comfortable illusions they clung to, they would have welcomed you without hesitation. You would have been easy to love, easy to accept, easy to keep. But you were never meant to be easy. You were meant to grow, to rise, to evolve beyond the limits they placed upon you. And that is why they feared you, because your growth forced them to confront their own stagnation. Your strength highlighted their weakness. Your willingness to walk alone reminded them that they never had the courage to do the same. At first, this realization will sting. You will wonder why they could not have chosen to grow with you, why they did not celebrate your strength instead of resenting it, why love could not have been stronger than fear. But the truth is, not everyone is ready to face themselves. Some people will choose comfort over truth, illusion over reality, chains over freedom, and that is not your burden to carry. There will come a day when you look back not with anger, not with sorrow, but with clarity. You will see that their rejection was never truly about you. It was about them, their limits, their wounds, their fears. And instead of mourning their absence, you will be grateful for your own survival, because if they had stayed, if you had held on to them, you would have been forced to shrink, to dim your light, to make yourself small enough to be palatable to those who feared your power. But you did not shrink, you did not break, you did not let their fear become your own. And now, standing on the other side, stronger, wiser, untamed, you finally understand. You were never the problem, you were the mirror they were too afraid to face, the storm they could not withstand, the fire they did not know how to hold. And in the end, it was never you who was lost. It was them. You have spent so much time wondering why they turned away, why their love came with conditions, why your existence unsettled them so deeply. But now you see it clearly. It was never your failure. It was your strength, your unwillingness to conform, your refusal to be less than who you were meant to be. They feared what they did not understand, they rejected what they could not control, and so they chose distance, silence, exile. But what they failed to realize is that in casting you out, they set you free. Free to grow beyond their limitations. Free to stand in your truth without apology. Free to become everything they never had the courage to be. So do not mourn their absence. Do not beg for a love that comes at the cost of your own identity. Walk forward, not with bitterness, but with certainty. You were never meant to be confined. You were never meant to seek approval from those who could not see you. You were meant to rise, and you have.